Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hey everybody, welcome back to school. I guess we do happen to be doing this back to school-ish episode when the school isn't back in session here in Chicago, where we're from. And we have a foreign exchange student with us today, Molly McAleer.
Hi,
Molly,
how are you?
Hey.
Oh, wait, so sorry. Wait, go ahead. Do my intro. Redo it. I didn't know. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're okay. So we're joined today by our own foreign exchange student all the way from Los Angeles. Molly McAleer is a writer. She's also a podcast host of two amazing podcasts, Mother May I Sleep With podcast, which is a Lifetime movie podcast, and Trend Lightly, which is a weekly pop culture podcast. And I listen to both and I highly recommend. So I know, Molly, if you want to say hey to everybody.
Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. I'm a new fan of yours, but we've had this on the books for quite some time. So I just hope I can live up to the legend that is the Never Been Kissed episode. It's fantastic.
I'm glad you liked it so much. Yeah, so
Thank
school's
you.
back in session. So today we're going to be talking about The Breakfast Club, iconic John Hughes movie from 1984. It is a real, what do they call them, bottle episode kind of movies, very much like a play, where it's about 5 kids who are in Saturday detention, which was 9 hours. 7 a.m. is a crazy early start for a full day detention. And so we have Bender, Claire, Andrew, Brian, and Alison. We are going to be talking about each character individually, and we're touching upon probably quite a few themes, like the parental influence on our sense of self, societal roles, figuring out who you are as a teenager, stereotypes, probably a few diagnoses here and there, as I clearly see in the movie. And so basically 5 kids in a room all day on a Saturday, coming together to talk. Very group therapy-esque in a lot of ways as well.
Very encounter group, yes.
Yes. So I figured we would start with, oddly, my favorite character, which I guess I could talk to my therapist about, John Bender. He's like, actually watching this movie this time around, I was surprised how much he felt like the carrier of a lot of the dialogue. Like, he's really got so much of the lines and the action, and so much of the movie kind of circles around him, which I didn't quite remember when I watched it when I was younger. This is also a movie that I watched a lot when it was on TBS and TNT. And so this is the first time I've watched the non-TV rated version.
Oh yeah, this is a definite R-rated movie. It's real different than what was on TBS, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, very much so.
Completely different. Like I didn't realize so many things.
Yeah.
I can't believe it felt like a completely different film.
So John Bender, he's introduced. He's the only kid that doesn't get dropped off to school by his parents, which was a really nice touch in just the onset of this character. That he's someone that is totally taking care of himself in a lot of ways. And what did you guys all notice right away about John Bender, just presentation-wise?
Well, I just want to say, I think that Bender might be the lead character of this film. And I noticed that he obviously carries himself with a lot of confidence and what now looks like a honed personal style. But at the time, I think was maybe trying to convey that there was something sort of ramshackle and uncool about him. Maybe like he'd be wearing a single glove that was left in the mud room because he didn't have a set sort of thing. But yeah, I wanted to say I think he's the main character, and I think he is exceedingly cool.
For sure. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I noticed right away that he was walking up. I'm sure that was a deliberate planned shot to show him kind of trudging up confidently, but also wearing a coat that is clearly too big for him and clothes that look sloppy and kind of wild, and that his hair is a little bit long and shaggier than everybody else's, and he's bigger than everybody else. I think they made quite a few things clear about Bender trudging immediately clear as everyone else is getting dropped off. And I think, did they show him right after Allison got out of the backseat of her car? Is he like walking up kind of around the front of that car as that gets dropped off?
I can't remember, but that does sound right,
That does sound right. I don't fucking
He's the
remember.
last person there.
which makes sense.
Yeah, I almost think that in some ways, maybe the easier path to follow is like how people arrive to therapy that day, because everything is done with like some sort of intention with how we meet these characters, and a lot of it is their sort of their timeliness, etc., all presents in who they are when you see them physically.
No,
if
it's
that makes sense.
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that Bender even gets there on time. He feels like he would roll up a little late. He also feels like he'd be what we'd call affectionately a super senior, someone who is like a fifth year senior, because he just looked like, I know this is very much movies, but he looks so much older age
He
wise
looks
than the rest of them.
35.
Even though he was only 24, the actor, when he filmed it, which kind of blew my mind.
I
Must
mean,
have
like,
sh-
oh, sorry. I was just going to say, maybe I'm delusional, but I think I look younger than all of these people as I was watching this.
Well, I think that's true for the 80s.
Right?
And
They
how
all,
everybody looks 35 and like they have a full mortgage when they are in high school.
but yeah, he looked like a real big grown adult to me. Even just
Oh,
watching
yeah.
this.
Yeah, and maybe you go back and like, there's somebody who put together a meme of the Cheers actors and put their ages on, and I was like, just no, get out of here, because they were all like 32 and they looked like perpetually 48.
In terms of Bender, what I felt like I noticed right away is he's probably getting hurt at home based on his cockiness, based on his. I'm also surprised that he showed up, because he also feels like a kid who wouldn't even come to detention. Like, why show up to detention?
Well, because
If
it's
you
probably
don't-
better than being at home.
Right. Exactly. Which is also why it's interesting that he shows up and he is on time and he is there just in general. And that's what I noticed right away. I just feel like with all of his posturing and all of his different, like the way that he's trying to influence the dynamic so that he can have some kind of like say, or like some kind of control, or some kind of like one up on everybody else, which makes a lot of sense when, if your experience is getting the shit beat out of you, or getting screamed at or yelled at or getting put in your place all the time, that for a teenager would make a lot of sense, that that's how he would kind of come off. So I also felt more like his clothes looked really well used, like he's had him for a long time, like maybe maybe he hasn't, and also like maybe part of the reason why they don't fit is because they're old clothes, like he's not getting taken care of.
Yeah, like hand-me-downs or like Goodwill clothes or like things that you get at like garage sales or stuff like that. And also all the layers he's wearing. I think talking about his clothes is interesting, you bringing that up, Molly, because I think also all the layers he wears is probably because he has to walk everywhere.
Yeah.
And trying to make that look like a look. I think so much of Bender is trying to take his circumstances and act like it's a choice he's making. So many kids that I work with who are having a hard time and who are like quote unquote behavioral problems, as a way to kind of like what you were saying, Hannah, as a way to feel more in control of all these out of control elements, they will adopt a persona to make it seem like, oh, I want to look like this and I want to act like this and I like being in trouble and I like starting fights and I don't give a shit if you think I'm an idiot because I don't care if I'm smart. Like all of the posturing you were saying that he does with like the McAleer comment and really putting down everybody else in the room is his way of pretending that he doesn't care, that he isn't a jock, or that he isn't well loved at home or spoiled, or everything that the other kids have that he doesn't, to make it seem like a choice he's making feels so much more obviously like empowering than the actual truth, which is how much of his life is genuinely like so sad and miserable, and how so much of the markings of him are due to being abused and not taken care of.
Horribly abused. I mean, burned with a cigar. And you see, like, none of his clothes fit.
Yeah.
The jacket's rolled up, the boots and the pants are clearly oversized. And I don't know if the bandana around the boot was a style choice. We didn't get enough shots of it, if that was just a thing that, I'm 10 years too young to understand, or if that was like he just didn't have laces and he had to make do. And it seemed
Punky Brewster influence. I will say, for all the things we've said about John Bender as a general vibe and a look so far, and apologies for interrupting, Ben, I just got so excited. I do hope that John Bender feels empowered wherever he is today, knowing that his style in this movie is the most evergreen and the one that, to this day, I would shank someone at the Goodwill to get that coat that he is wearing in the intro.
He probably would too.
Oh my God, there's nothing about his outfit that I really wouldn't try so hard to get and have that. That's so my look as a adult woman. And I really do think that he's the only one in this movie, while so many looks are classic, he's the only one whose style anyone is still chasing.
Oh yeah,
I think he's like
absolutely
the template of 90s grunge. I think every band that was like from that whole look was trying to copy John Bender.
I mean,
and now that that's come back,
Jared Leto wouldn't exist as he currently does if it wasn't for this look on John Bender in The Breakfast Club. Because there would be no Jordan Catalano. Yes.
There'd be no Jordan. And you're so right. Yeah, no, he really is the archetype for that guy. I mean, I don't know. Jordan at least had the kindness to be polite in class. I mean, Bender really, it's rough when he gets in an environment.
I'm also curious if he has any sort of like learning disabilities, because there does seem to be like, I don't know. I got the sense, maybe I'm just reading too much, like that his like reading comprehension was kind of poor. But I think also something to be aware of is when you grow up in a traumatizing household, you are potentially getting head injuries on a regular basis, which affects your brain, obviously.
I also do want to say, though, here's the thing, is that I am out of my weight class in terms of being able to hold a candle to the many things that you guys will illuminate throughout this entire movie. I'm sure like you guys are just really so fun to listen to, and honestly, a little scary. I'm going to be real with you. I had some real woman, not just because I was literally cleaning my bathroom as I was listening to this podcast. I had some real woman in the mirror moments when I was listening to your Never Been Kissed episode, where I was like, don't look in the mirror right now. Like, just stare at the bottle of 409 and keep spraying, bitch, because they are talking about you. So
dissociate more.
Literally, it's not even about, I'm just trying to get the cat's litter box clean and clean the whole little half bath down so she has a whole space. But I was going to say that I am riddled with learning disabilities. And I was thinking about that a lot as I was watching this movie. Like, I'm definitely neurotypical. I don't feel like I need to announce my diagnoses, but I will. ADHD for sure. I was diagnosed as dyslexic, and I feel as though I'm dyslexic based on my understanding of dyslexia. But like, and not just in a way that it's like, oh, my TikTok algorithm is telling me I'm on the spectrum. I mean, like, literally my commenters will be like, Molly, you're on the spectrum. Like, and I don't mean that in a way that I think is negative. I think that would actually explain a lot. And that I do relate to Bender in some ways, in that sort of having to build up an exterior, because I had to do kind of what I think Bender does a little bit, what you're suggesting. I had to do that when I was transitioning to, okay, I'm Molly, the girl who's tried so hard to be a good student, and is very afraid of bad behavior, but I want to work in comedy. And so I had to like really build up a veneer and almost a false persona of like coolness that I've realized now might have just been heavily masking. And I'm like, oh, like all the times people said I was cool and I was like, oh, that's nice that they think that. Like, it's like maybe I really did put on a false veneer without even realizing, where people didn't even know how to read it except for, oh, maybe that's cool. At this time, though, I don't think you were allowed to be an individual so much in this part of Illinois. So,
oh, for sure.
There's
Definitely
no
not.
sense of that.
No, John Bender was probably having to find his little small freak show metalhead areas to kind of really wild out in. But I know something you had brought up, Ben, like in our chat before we recorded, was the idea of, I think you said like social armor. Is that
Roll
what you
armor,
said?
yeah.
Roll armor. And
Mhm.
how that's what you were just saying, Molly, made me think of that. And also how trying to act like this is my persona, this is masking, to mask like my horrible family life, to mask my possible learning stuff. Because also, if you have active trauma chronically at home, your ability to learn is shit in a lot of ways. Like some kids can pull it off. And for some kids, you're so distracted all the time by your life outside of school that you can't focus and you can't do well. And how in the 80s, especially, and before the 80s, even the 90s too, kids like Bender weren't being thought of for like ADHD or for like that he's having trouble at home or focusing or something like that. He would just be considered maybe dumb and a problem kid.
Put in
And
BD classes.
yeah, put in like special ed, as they would have said, and really been neglected in that space as well.
I think that's all likely, and it's very true that people develop differently neurocognitively when they're under distress. And Molly, I appreciate you being willing to share what you've had to go through and recognizing that, because it's helpful to people to hear that real people who have made something of themselves have these things and live with them and can see themselves in these characters that have a history too, because all of us do. As the point of the film, we all have a history, and it affects us, it shapes us, it makes us interact with our surroundings differently. And I think the comments you're making about John are really on point, Brittany. And I think the only thing that I want to add to it is that John isn't afraid of anybody or anything there, because none of them are as scary as his dad.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, you're going to beat the shit out of me. Like, I've been training to get the shit kicked out of me my whole life. I think what is interesting, though, is the only time he does seem scared is when he's cornered when he's locked, basically, in solitary confinement by the principal in that, I guess, I don't know what kind
Supply
of room.
closet.
Yes, supply closet. And the principal, who's an asshole and should be put in prison,
Whipped in public.
Yeah. Starts berating him and then starts to goad him into a fight. And then he flinches when the principal like fake swings at him. And I do think that is the time in the movie where we see Bender probably having a trauma reaction, like being in an enclosed space with an adult male who has power over him, like legit power over him, being ostracized. And it's also the only time when he really isn't performing. He doesn't have an audience. And so I think that is where we see probably the truest presentation of what Bender is like at home. And that, I think that's a spot on what you say, Ben, because that's the only time we really see him seeming meek and scared, is in that environment, because he has no one to perform for. And he probably feels really trapped. And I don't know how it isn't. I don't know. So much of his dynamic with that principal feels like he's recreating his dynamic with his father. And it's so upsetting.
Oh, it was horrible. I was so angry at that. I think Judd Nelson's acting was terrific in that scene, is watching his eyes go so wide, his nostrils flaring, his heart rate was clearly up, and blood pressure up, all of the things that you would expect to see in someone that is starting to actively dissociate into a part. And it wasn't the part that he'd been demonstrating the whole time where he was putting on that role armor of, I'm going to be the class clown, the antagonist. You can't touch me. I'm so edgy that I'm going to unnerve all of you so bad and knock you off your game and show you all the things you think matter don't matter to me at all. But the principal called him on his shit, but did it in the most cruel way possible by isolating him, cornering him, and causing a mixture of a freeze and an appease response. Like, he had to surrender. He had to surrender, and he did not want to. And he didn't ultimately after he got out of that spot where he was clearly dangerous. But the principal activated all of his trauma of being likely put in a similar situation and actually beaten to the point that he had to freeze and stop himself from even defending himself, because that mechanism in our brain exists for when we passively read the situation, or subconsciously read the situation and see, I cannot win. It doesn't matter what I do, I cannot win, and therefore my options are comply or shut up and freeze, because anything I do will make it worse. And anybody that thinks that they would do X, Y, or Z in a situation and behave differently isn't in that situation and hasn't been physically overpowered, because there is something inside of all of us that tells us you will lose. Like, imagine a dude that's 6'6", built like a brick shit house, steps out of whatever car you've been honking at and lets you know that he's about to fuck your world up if you say one more thing. You're going to shut up.
This principal does make $31,000 a year, so you should respect him.
I literally just looked this up because I could not move off that number, honey. And like, I literally am not trying to be a Capricorn, but I could not move off the number. So it is $93,847.35 today for a 31K salary. And that area of Illinois is incredibly pricey, but the idea that he was already a homeowner at that salary, honestly, if I was making $93,000 a year and I was him, I'd still be driving Uber at night. And you can't do that when you're the school principal. I'd be wanting to hit that 100K.
Well, it's probably why he's working Saturday detention.
Yeah.
Oh, like probably making overtime. Yeah.
That's why he wants to keep Bender there. He's a true capitalist freak. He doesn't care about Bender, much like, sadly, so many adults in Bender's life. He's exploiting him.
Right. I mean, and I loved that scene that happened after that with the principal and Carl, the custodian, where they're just so effective a character Carl was. When Carl caught him digging through the files, the principal was saying, like, it just disgusts me that these kids are going to be the one taking over our country, blah, 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 boomer speak. And then
taking care of me someday.
Right.
Kids are going to be taking care of me someday.
And he said, don't count on it.
Yeah. He was Carl is like kind of really the star of the movie.
I agree.
He's like the wise sage that I feel like a lot of times plays custodians.
I've called two people a star of the movie so far, but I mean that I'm locking in my stars of the movie because that's it.
Locking in now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I plan to talk about Bender during treatment, but one thing I do want to touch upon here.
That's a bingo mark for those of you that are catching.
Yeah.
Or tracking.
Is the way that principal interacts with Bender is the worst possible way you can engage with a kid like Bender. Absolutely. Because, well, one, why are you power struggling with a teenager? You look like a fucking idiot. And it's easy to, it's not hard to do. I worked with little kids with behavior problems, and the amount of times that I would have to stop and be like, Brittany, are you about to like continue arguing, like doing a back and forth with a 9-year-old who has like a severe mental health problem? Like, grow up, shut up, and like take a breather from like just the way that he allows Bender to get his goat is so textbook immature. And I think continues to reiterate for kids like Bender, like, what, you're not showing him any other way to be. Like, this idea that adults will put on kids and adolescents that they should know how to behave like people once they like exit the womb. And it's like, no, kids and teenagers are being shown by the adults in their life how to engage with the world and how to treat other people. So when you are acting exactly like him, what other option are you? You're not showing him modeling anything different in terms of how to deal with someone who pisses you off, who upsets you, who annoys you. And also with a kid like Bender, he's already written himself off in the sense of he's not going to be a kid that gets attention and accolades, like positive attention and accolades and success in this very specific way. So he's just going to throw himself into this persona we've been talking about. And so there's no hope in him. And so he's going to ride the power struggle wave as far as, I mean, that whole like back and forth with giving him like 8 weeks of Saturday detentions is so stupid. And obviously the punishment is not correcting his behavior. So it's also pointless. And why wouldn't he just keep doing that? He has nothing else going on. He has no hope for something to turn around. And the way that the principal confirms that in the supply closet, what would motivate a kid like Bender to change?
Nothing.
And what's going to give him the confidence to change?
Nothing. He's just going to.
He's a piece of shit. He's telling you, you're telling him he's a piece of shit.
He's going to believe you.
You're threatening him with physical harm. Like,
yeah, what are you showing him about the world other than it's full of violent adults? And
well, like how real world experience is the only thing that you get to enjoy when you're sort of othered, right, in high school. And I think that he's sort of comfortably fallen into this role that just makes sense for him, or that's passive or easy to be because he can't show up full blown to any other area of his life. He's not financially well off. He doesn't have the support system at home, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I have can I ask a fan question of you guys? Okay. So like in today's like sort of pop psychology world with that scene with Bender and the principal in the supply closet, I think everyone now would look at a teacher wanting to go into a closet with a student and confront him like a man. You look at that like as an idea and it's like, oh, this guy has like some weird sexual deviant behavior. Who wants to do that to a high school student? Like, Jesus Christ, man, they're just high school students. But I'm wondering like if you can kind of hone in on that thing of like, where at the time I feel like this was a very common theme of a guy that like wanted to beat up a younger man or suppress him somehow. I feel like if you were to do reverse inflation, where now we start out at you're a pedophile, what do you think they would have called him back in the day? Like as a
hard ass
diagnosis, hard ass.
Yeah.
What drives that?
I think, you're already on it that somebody that he's feeling unsatisfied in his life and threatened by the freedom of spirit that Bender has, that the dialogue with Carl showed that he'd clearly lost the luster and enjoyment of life and realized that whatever he thought his life was going to be, it isn't. It's become formulaic and he's trapped. So he's resentfully trying to trap other people and not let them have enjoyment he didn't have.
Yeah, I mean, he's like classic someone who's become a bully as an adult.
Yep.
In that he feels disempowered and feels like, I think he thinks he's a loser. And I don't know if he would admit that he thinks he's a loser or that he is one. But you can see in those moments when he has moments to himself where he kind of looks like, there's one moment where after he like yells at them, maybe it's the 8 detentions in a row thing where he like goes in the hallway and he kind of has this like eyes closed moment where he looks a little disappointed in himself that he went there and then he kind of lost control-ish. But he just feels like someone who has to constantly assert control. There are so many more old school adults who have this very like toxic masculinity, generational power shit where they're like, I have to get other people to submit to me and I can't tolerate anything but submission because of how I get my feelings of ego and power. And him, well, yeah, nowadays, if you like took a kid in the supply closet with you and then there was a lot of noise and then you came out, that would be crazy to see. But at my high school, They used to paddle kids until the late 80s, early 90s, like with paddles.
Yeah, we
And
had
I
a
had a
principal
science
in
teacher who would brag about how hard he could paddle kids back when he could do it.
Public school?
Yes.
Yep. They in Illinois they allowed it. I think it's for 1, maybe 2 years. The school district I went to, it was my primary school, so third through fifth grade was the way my town broke it up, and we had a principal that the school board allowed to paddle kids, and he definitely tried to intimidate us. There was one moment where I was in the principal's office, probably for fighting, and like the principal like literally took his paddle out and like whacked the radiator with it and like tried to intimidate us. And he did use it on kids. I don't think he used it very often, but there was moments where that happened. And I think remembering that these people that would have been this age, particularly 10 years before this principal I had, as he was a bit younger, maybe 40 then, but these people all grew up with parents that likely were in World War II, and World War II reached such a like vaunted status in the cultural zeitgeist that nothing anybody could ever do that like ever would match up to as cool or as significant, as important as to what these people did. And they never told the truth of their stories. They just went in the garage and got drunk as shit because of the horrible stuff that they saw and the trauma that they had that never got treated. But then nobody's stories could ever match their significance, because if their pain and the losses that they suffered lost significance, then they would be doing their friends who died disservice, and they pass that on to their children, aka our parents, who struggled with going to their own wars that was rejected by society, and they were met with cruelty and called horrible things for the horrible things that they did that weren't probably a whole lot different than what happened in World War II, but it's all more politically complicated. And then playing all that shit out on these kids that are trying to live a free life free of war. There was no war in the 80s. The 80s was a peaceful time. These kids.
I was Googling that today. I was like, is there a war?
No. Like that was the first time in a long time there was no war. I mean, there were some conflicts, but none of it was full scale like Vietnam. Like this guy would have watched his friends go to and stuff, and maybe did. But
yeah,
you see how people play out that shit. And I think he was there to serve as kind of a foil of like Carl or the principal could be different types of people that Bender would encounter or be later, that like, or maybe Andrew would be, I guess, but that bully type that couldn't actualize because somebody put a brick on him, and now because other people are showing some freedom, he's going to put a brick on anybody showing that free spirit so that they get their dreams crushed like his and be successful median income earning folks that find safety through getting their spirits crushed, because that's what we do to care for these kids. We crush the individuality out of them, or individuality. I have lips that work.
Yes.
You do.
No, but like I always laugh about how, the Chris Farley character, like living in a van down by the river. Like that character was supposed to be 32 years old. And it's so like, which is crazy to think about as a 40-year-old woman who literally I'm like, I actually would like living in if someone would come and like make it all the parts work and stuff like that for me. If I could hire someone full time to make sure I comfortably live in a van, I think I could do that. But the whole point of that era, what I remember sort of having a friend gently point out to me when I was sort of marveling at that in more recent times was like, Molly, back then, if you didn't have like a family and a house and like an important job where you were making a lot of money, if you weren't balling out, if you didn't have a Rolex or someone who was going to gift you a Rolex, you were a fucking loser.
Right.
And I was like, whoa, like that actually is a very important cultural context, because I've always thought 32 was and I think maybe also that's like maybe a little bit of a joke on a joke with the 32-year-old, but like it's I forgot that this was a very trying time to be someone who wasn't living as a full-blown capitalist or at the top of their white male game.
Definitely true.
So anything else you want to say about Bender before we take a break?
I think it was a critical power shift that Bender showed after like Andrew took his ass down
Oh,
quickly
yeah.
and like white knighted him and it was like, look, bitch, I will fold you up. Okay. And then Bender just was like, didn't even fight him, but when he got up and produced that switchblade, I think that was a moment of like exhibiting the actual stark danger that Bender or someone like him that's been that victimized would understandably carry a weapon
Yeah.
and need to shift the power balance back. That knife probably had his dad's name on it. And that if his dad hit him one more goddamn time,
Yeah.
that there was going to
Yeah.
be a murder scene at his house.
Yeah.
He probably sleeps with that knife under his pillow.
I guarantee that's his most prized possession.
The priority of safety for a kid like Bender is so big.
And why we need to be careful and mindful that we don't just run up and put our hands on people or think that, you know, just because you're more athletically gifted or whatever, that somebody that you have less to lose than they do.
Well, we'll take a break there and we'll be right back. So shifting sharply, but feels poetic to shift from Bender to Claire, as Bender can't leave Claire the fuck alone the whole movie,
Nope.
which we haven't even touched upon that part of it. But Claire is the popular girl, the perfect girl, the prom queen-esque girl. But I think she's this person that when observing someone like her, you would think that she has no problems. And I think what's so interesting and well written about this movie is that every kid's so different and every kid still has problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she has a very specific kind of problem, which was also, I wonder how novel, even in like the early 80s, which is having parents that were maybe going to get divorced and kind of maybe living like this separate, well, the separate life thing was probably pretty common. But I don't know, what are your thoughts, Hannah, about, because I know you and I were talking about the Claire dynamic with her parents.
Yeah, I think that is something that seems pretty evident with her conversation that she has with her dad in the car, is that she is being triangulated in the marriage. She is getting instead of talking to each other, they're giving information to her, or they are using her as a distraction from their other problems. They're very much putting her in a role where now she has to try and appease both of them and be okay with the way that they treat her. And that's pretty common in terms of, especially with a couple that maybe isn't getting along very well, or a couple that's having a lot of marital strife, or they don't feel connected to each other and they only feel like parents. Sometimes people really lean into the parent role where they kind of lose a part of their individuality in some ways. And so sometimes when that happens in marriages, and then the kid is actually the one who has to take on all the slack and all the flack for everything that's going on in the family. And so I think that Claire is being used by both of her parents, where neither one of them have to confront anything or do anything different, but she has to sit with all the discomfort.
She also feels like an only child. I don't know if that's confirmed or disproved in the movie.
I don't know if it is
She
either, but
says
she
her
does feel like an
brother-
only child.
Oh, she does have a
Oh,
brother?
okay.
He says, because at one point someone said to her, I believe it was Bender, if you had to go live with your mom or
Oh,
your dad,
yeah.
who would you pick? And she said,
Her older brother.
I'd probably just go live with my brother. And I thought that was actually very interesting as an only child. And I'm sorry, a lot of my commentary will be self-centered, and I apologize for that.
No worries.
But I was thinking that as like an only child, I was like, damn, that's fucking interesting to be like, I gotta get, if I'm gonna get out of my home situation, maybe I'll go live with my brother.
Yeah, which I don't know where I thought only child, because I remember writing down that line in terms of how telling. Well, one, it made me feel hopeful that she has a positive relationship and basically an escape via her brother. And it sounds like he must live out of the house already, which is also telling about
And-
like, did he get out as soon as he could?
Well, and
Yeah.
also, you know, that energy of only child, that brother could be old enough
True.
that she feels like an only child and has an only child energy.
Well, she's the
Because-
only kid in the house.
Right. So,
her parents feel very high school sweetheart, or like they got pregnant really fast, and like she has like an older brother who is a
Maybe.
lot older than her, and that's why they're together, and that's why their marriage sucks.
Or a second marriage.
Or a second marriage. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Brittany, you had asked something about, Hannah was making such great points that I was shutting myself up because I didn't want to interrupt because Hannah's awesome. Brittany, you said something about like wondering like with the time period, what the divorces rate. So I was curious about that and went on an adventure and looking up the divorce rate per 1,000. So in 1970, it would have been 15 per 1,000. 15 marriages ending in divorce per 1,000, but that number jumped to 23 in the 80s and dropped back down. And that was the highest it's ever been.
Including now?
Now it's at a 50-year low.
Oh, well, people aren't getting married. That's why.
Well, no, this would only count married people, but people are getting married later and for their own reasons.
Not for pregnancy reasons.
Like when I DJ'd weddings, I noticed like when I started, because I DJ'd weddings from 2009 to probably 17, that the weddings that I did in the early years around 2009, 2010, many people were kind of just out of college in that 23, 24 range. But by the time I was done, the average age of people getting married was 31. Like there were a lot of shifts that happened. And I think this would have been a part of a wave of social stain on her entire little social Richie Rich world where her parents were getting a divorce. And that would have been both a thing a lot of people were starting to go through, but still be pretty new and probably made her some kind of pariah that made her feel all sorts of ways about herself and her safety that contribute to how she presents, I think.
Yeah, and it seemed like her parents were doing the thing that people would do instead of get divorced, which is spend absolutely no time together. Like there's a few references and also jabs that Bender makes about her mom just like being drunk in the Caribbean and just kind of maybe spending time away and being an alcoholic. And Claire does kind of more than insinuate that her mom is the more hard, volatile parent with like that'll like hold rules and say you're grounded, and that her dad is the more permissive one. And their relationship actually is the one that gave me a lot of kind of icky feelings. Yeah. Not so much that I think he was necessarily like doing something to her, but I think he was definitely doing that thing that sometimes parents can do where he is dissatisfied with his wife. So he's kind of putting his daughter in that sort of partner role where he's like giving her big earrings and he's being too affectionate with her. And he's like putting all of his love that should go to a spouse onto his daughter. And it's
called
gross.
Surrogate spouse.
Yes. And you can tell that she isn't into it. Like in the car when he drops her off and he's being really like, it's okay. She's like, she does have this look on her face like her dad's giving her the ick. Like, I'm good. I want to go and not be here. And being caught in that dynamic where the mom probably sees that. I'm sure she does. And I wonder if that also causes a lot of damage to the mom's relationship to Claire in that sort of way where.
Because then it feels like a competition, right? Between the daughter and the mom for his attention. So then there's a chance that absolutely creates a barrier between her and connecting with her mom.
Oh yeah. And it seemed like not only is it that, but the dad, based on her dialogue, because we don't see it, right? But it seems like from her dialogue, her perception of it is that her dad is using that on purpose. It's not even genuine, that he's weaponizing it to make the mom jealous and kind of override whatever things mom has come up with. And her first comment to him is, "Daddy, why didn't you get me out of this?" That's her first line in the movie.
Yep.
So
and then he's like I know, like acquiescing to her in a way that gives me the weirds.
Yeah, like, I'll buy you a pony or whatever.
Yeah, whatever
afterwards.
he said.
Yeah.
And then it does make sense if you trickle it down to her presentation at school, because what Claire is learning is how to be sort of a product, how she's not really a person. She's her own persona. She is like a little figurine in her household. And so then she goes to school and she's also kind of like a figurine, a Barbie doll at school. Like it's all about external pressure, external validation, who she is to other people. And there's no curiosity from her parents or from her peers about who is Claire, though, underneath, like who is actually Claire? Like what is Claire like? And obviously, because it's so easy to do when you're a teenager anyway, that becomes her persona, like how defensive she gets in the scene when they do the whole horrible, like, would you still talk to us on Monday thing?
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, well, you don't get it. Like, she's very aware of like the social rules.
Yeah.
And it does seem to feel understandably like picked on when all the other kids are dogpiling on her for being so attached to the social roles and rules. But that's like the WASP kind of thing, like when you're a WASP and it's so much like image based and facade based and you aren't a real person. You're like a blow up doll.
Yeah. I mean, even her special talent is that she can put on her makeup with
In her cleavage.
lipstick centered in her cleavage. Like, of all the special things they're talking about that she can do, that's what she's given. I thought that was profoundly sad, honestly.
Well, honestly, though, Ben, if you were like called to task to be in a talent show out of nowhere, like what would your talent be? Like
Don't
a lot of
get him
us do
started,
not
Molly.
have
Oh God,
a.
this could
And
be
actually, maybe that's a little bit of a
response.
rhetorical and say, if Ben, if you know 6 talents you would have, well, congratulations, because I would sit there and not have a fucking clue what to do. I would, if I didn't know already how to apply lipstick in my cleavage, I'd be trying to improv it, and if it didn't work out, I'd say, yeah, it's like a comedy bit, like that's my special talent. But can I just really quickly say, though, for all of Claire's like sort of faux vapidness, I think they really land her character very well, and that her wealth is like I would say appropriate. Like it doesn't feel outlandish or weird. They do belong in the same school district, all of these people for sure. And I'm from Lexington, Mass, which is like a very bougie town on paper. It's one of the best school systems in Massachusetts. But at the same time, like, you know, my mom was a single mom who had me, and we lived in an apartment on the outskirts, which I feel like might be true of some people economically in this movie, specifically Bender. But I think Bender would maybe even be more of a true townie. But if you were to look at someone like Claire, okay, maybe your family settled there, like after the dad moved from one coast or another, the family sort of wound up in Chicago. And you can just tell, like, yes, she has sushi for lunch, but she's never probably been to Japan. When they're like, where do you want to be? She's like, I wish I was on a plane to France. And
Right.
if you were to shove this movie down like 3 tax brackets, like she is not that much different than a girl in a single family home who has a bedroom that is like London or Paris themed. Like she's not obscenely wealthy. And so while like her privilege definitely tinges like her character quite a bit, I would say that it's not overwhelmingly so or not cartoonishly so. I also like, it's one of those things where she's very pretty, but like for like a redhead, like, I mean, you would assume that she's popular at least large in part due to her wealth. I mean, to be a popular redhead, even as pretty as Molly Ringwald is, to be a popular fucking like top of the list redhead in 1984, like you had to have some major cachet.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because she plays in 16 Candles, right? And she plays the polar opposite in a lot of ways of this character, the lonely virgin nerd who people can't even remember it's her birthday, like an invisible girl. And I think you're right in that she's operating from like a social class, like not like like you said, like a absurdly wealthy one, but I wouldn't be shocked if all the girls that she's friends with now, their parents all hang out. Their parents all go to maybe like the same nice country club. And
Ugh.
their moms went to the same, like, I don't know, jazzercise class.
There's some other way that
Probably.
you get ingratiated into the popular group at that school for sure. And I think it could exist around a country club.
Yes.
Yeah, or whose parents are partying and like who's hosting stuff. Yeah, I think it's all of the above. That there's some way that you're part of the cool class or not.
Mm-hmm. And if
Yep.
she lost her status, like the BMW and all that stuff, that it would probably have a big impact on her status within her friend group.
Probably.
Yeah. So
Her parents
what would
lost
her
their jobs.
standing be without that? That's her standing.
Yeah.
Her whole standing is that, like, I'm the girl who has diamond earrings and eats sushi in detention. That is, before we know anything else, especially because we do know she's a prude. I mean, really, everything you said about her character in 16 Candles, the only difference I could think is that people in this movie, because she's popular, they probably do remember her birthday.
yeah,
But
probably do.
otherwise, and maybe the house was overstuffed, but otherwise, I mean, it's kind of the same character.
Yeah, because the parents do have a pretty big, nice house and 16 Candles. I mean,
Yeah,
like
on a
the older
wedding.
sister is kind of what she's playing in this movie. Is the older
Yeah.
sister in 16 Candles? Does the older sister in 16 Candles marry Carl, the janitor actor?
Possibly. Actually, you know what? That does sound right because he would reuse the worlds a lot. But I mean, it's better the older sister than
Possibly.
Long Duck Dong. You know what I mean?
Oh my God, I don't even know if we can ever do 16 Candles because of
You
that.
can't. No, you can. But I will say it's going to be a learning curve. I'll tell you that
Oh,
much because
yeah.
you're going to have to say the entire time. Well, we just want to acknowledge that you can't even talk. Like, it's one of those things where you're going to feel guilty talking about it unless you can really, you're good at your job. You know how to do that.
hmm
Yeah.
It'll get shredded. Like, I hope you don't like this movie if you listen to the show, because you won't after it.
But I think, like, yeah, the whole point of Claire kind of is that she doesn't have a point outside of her status and outside of her image. Like, I don't know who Claire would be if she didn't have this wealth as her personality or this position as her personality. It doesn't seem like she knows who she is either. Like, a lot of the questions she gets asked, including the hidden talent, she doesn't really have solid answers to. And I wonder if anyone ever really asks her. You know, her parents are probably so far up each other's asses with their cattiness that they aren't paying attention to her and they aren't trying to foster her as like an individual. She's just a
like
pawn.
She's her daddy's wife.
Yeah.
Don't you think? And that,
Mhm.
like, you know, with the mom being gone and everything else, I mean, really, her job, I feel, in life at this point is to flip through fashion magazines, get along with the right people, and then maybe like float into a pretty good college where maybe she'll find her way, but she might not be at this point anyway. She'd be getting her MRS. You know what I mean? As they used to say back
Ring
in the
by
day.
spring, you know?
At
Yeah,
Northwestern. I mean, like, this is where they would go. I mean, they'd go to the big, expensive, fancy private school that's right nearby at Northwestern U, and probably exactly that, get the MRS and find somebody that's a pseudo version of her dad. And I think that's exactly right. Mom is no longer willing to be dad's arm candy and trophy, so now she is.
And MRS wasn't like a slur back then.
No.
Like, that was considered like, oh, good for her.
And I think, and actually, I was thinking, I don't even know if she'd go to college. I don't even know if her dad would be supporting that. I feel like her goal really would be to get her MRS. Like, I feel like that's the goal that she would feel like is important, and that her dad would probably feel like is important. And if he's the one influencing, if he's the one who manages the money, like, there's a whole, I don't know. I don't know if she'd be encouraged to go to college. I don't know if she'd be encouraged because the way that her dad looks at her and the way that even her mother looks at herself seems to be as, I'm an object and that's the only role that I'm allowed to play.
Yeah, which is probably why she feels like her only potential is to escape entirely and go to her brother. And then maybe there she can become a person.
Fan theory, I think her brother lives in Japan. And that's what the sushi is a reference to, is maybe her brother does something cool in Japan. But no, she would have to go to college because you would be a loser at that time if you didn't go to college. Like, there was
Especially
no
from that
world.
class.
No, like it's I enjoyed that
Okay.
part of your Never Been Kissed episode as well. Sorry to keep being referential, but it's true that like there was for most of my life anyway, like if you didn't go to college, you were a loser. And now I think, oh my God, if I came into a kid, if all of a sudden I like had a kid and they said, what do I do with my life? I'd say, don't worry about college right now. And that was never the memo I got. And so actually, a lot of this movie, I think, centers around being on the precipice of potentially higher education, which is a stressor that's, I'm sure you all know.
It does make me wonder, though, kind of, I'll take a middle road between Molly and Hannah, in that my mom was the first person in her family to go to college and especially as like a woman. She was the first person, period. But she went to college like only maybe a few years before this movie. And her parents discouraged her from going to college because they were like, you're going to be a spinster, that it was not a feminine look to be that educated.
Yeah.
So it could be very different between like 79, 80, and like 84. But I do know my mom had that experience. And so there's so much of that poo-pooing of women being educated around that time that I think it could go either way, depending on maybe that culture around there.
Well,
Yeah.
84,
So
84 is
interesting.
what, like 6 years into women being able to have credit cards and bank accounts?
Oh,
Like
dark.
with their own, I mean, it's, I wonder why the divorce rate went up, like
They could.
they could, exactly. And those that needed to had financial means to escape. Not that it's a bad thing. It's a good thing because bad situation being bound to it by finances is fucked up. I think this class of folks that live here would have been probably pushed towards college, and it's also equally possible that maybe there's that shame that you're looking at that like, what are you even doing that? Just like get a husband. Your husband do that.
Well, what are you gonna do from like like sit around and do cocaine? Like, what the hell are you gonna do with your day?
What
If,
she'll
like,
do is
you can't-
she'll go to the social events. She'll do a promenade around the country club. She'll like wag her tail feathers. Hopefully, maybe she'll get a boyfriend by the time she leaves high school, and then she'll probably get pressured to marry him. It's surprising that I think in another movie, her and Andrew would have already been dating, and they would have been a couple in the room.
I think Andrew's a little beneath her in some ways.
He's
but
working class for sure.
I think he's like I think he's like probably the 12th or 15th most popular guy in his class, but he's definitely in the circle. But yeah, like what was a woman to do with her time back then? Because going back as far as Greece, we were already shitting on women having a vocation with like beauty school, right? You were already a loser for going to beauty school, which by the way, if I could do one thing differently in my life, it would have been to like go to beauty school after I'd gotten my college degree. I wish I had a vocation like that so badly because I would feel very confident falling back on that. And that's why I was kind of like later on, we'll see that like Bender, there's some attitude around him being more of a shop guy. And I'm like, I feel like Bender could financially be the best off out of all of these people. But Andrew, when we first see him get dropped off at school, his dad's pissed he has to drop him off, not just because his dad's like, I know it sucks to be there, but the problem is you got caught, but you can't be doing bad stuff because you're going to lose your full ride. And I say, without a full ride, like, so without a full ride, what college world are we talking? What would a woman like Claire do at 18 if not go to college in 1984? We were very like, the women in my family were in college in like the 50s. So like, I literally it didn't occur to me that, but you're right. Especially probably in the Midwest, it was like a homely, weird girl thing to go get a college education.
Claire, she probably would just live with her parents and flounce around until she got a good boyfriend. She'd probably professionally date until she found her husband. And that's probably what she would do, and just go to events and go to parties and just be a Midwest upper class socialite.
Oh, like helping her father. Oh, I help my father.
Yeah, I help at the store.
Yeah,
But
exactly. That sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Party
Yeah.
plan and event coordinator.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
actually hard.
Oh yeah,
But
it's a hard job.
but I do feel like she's that person that like after college you realize like, oh, you're fucking rich. Or like after high school when someone's like, oh, I'm just working for my dad, and you realize like later on that's like slang for like my dad pays for my life.
Yeah,
Low
my dad
key,
put me on payroll.
but I'm not allowed to say that because
Yes, because that's gauche.
because it'd be acknowledging that we're not rich, but we have enough to go around.
All right, so since we are starting to talk about Andrew, we will take a break here and be right back to discuss him more fully. All right, so we are back and we're going to talk about our boy Andrew. So Andrew is the jock, which is funny. I don't think of Emilio Estevez as the jock type. I feel like I can put him in my pocket, but that's me also
Exactly.
stereotyping him, so shame on me.
I mean, our introduction to him is as the coach for the Mighty Ducks, as a professional hockey player, Gordon Bombay.
That's true. And you're right, like he gets introduced as
Like our age group.
he gets introduced as a kid who is probably, his dad seems working class. He's dependent on our scholarship, so he has to stay out of trouble. But his dad also doesn't seem, you can tell right away that his dad doesn't seem too fucked up by what he did to get into detention. Like
Nope.
you were saying, Ben, like he's more, it's the very like, I'm sorry I got caught energy and not like the sorry for what I actually did.
The dad was like, dad wasn't
Yes.
ashamed of what he did. I think, obviously his self-revealing monologue was pretty powerful of him expressing his actual remorse and regret, showing like actual recognition that what he did was horrible. But the introduction of the character is clearly showing that like dad has he has like a shooting vest on, and he's driving a Ford Bronco SUV, like the first SUV, I think, and kind of carrying that like sportsman, man's man, kind of everyman attitude.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about Andrew is something I started noticing early and often with his character is how atypical he actually is of the mentality of the stereotypical jock, in that you can see right away that he is clocking other people. And I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head in the beginning, but he is very attuned to other people. Like he seems like he has a natural high emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And
Very
he
empathic.
is he's checking in with other people. He's the first one to defend Claire against Bender, which also could just be him kind of playing the jockey role in some ways. But he's very attuned to everybody in the group in a way that is very genuinely leadership-esque, which is very sweet. And unfortunately, like a lot of, especially men who are victims of toxic masculinity, that version of leadership is not appreciated by his father and probably maybe even by the group he is within at school. And what they consider leadership is more of what we see with the principal, which is like domination. To be strong and to be a leader is to be, I guess, feared more than loved. And Andrew feels like someone who would actually be very easy to love and very easy to love others if he was allowed.
I think looking at Andrew, I think John Hughes did some interesting writing between Andrew and Bender, and it kind of flipped a little bit of some of the stereotypes, which probably makes this movie so enduring. Is that while Bender obviously carries some of the burnout characteristics, he also carries a lot of that alpha jock like mentality that you would have seen in other movies of the era, where the jock who's the hyper confidence, the mask, the antagonizing others, the controlling the situation would have filled. And Andrew doesn't fit that. He has more of like the kind of the team captain, the dedicated, like the white knight kind of attitude of like, he's a tryhard. You know, he may not be the best athlete in the world, but he's going to try really, really hard. And sometimes in athletics, that actually is enough to get you somewhere. Like he was wearing a state patch on his shoulder. So he's clearly been a successful wrestler. Getting to state in wrestling is pretty fucking hard, actually. And looking at him doing that, but not like carrying that dominant that Bender does, where he's like, see me, notice me, let me control this. I think there's some interesting writing of showing that he can be empathic, he can be thinking, he's more of a rule follower, team player, don't do the wrong things. And also, side note, don't get in my way and like fuck up my chances to get out of here, because my entire goal of life is to get the fuck out of here and build a new life for myself where I don't have to fight for scraps of attention with my athletic talent, but instead can shine on my own merits because I'm kind of awesome, damn it. Notice me beyond what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like, this character, rewatching it today, it is such a love letter in terms of writing to the pre-collegiate athlete in every school that reads as popular because they're fit, they're athletic, they're cool, they hang out with they fit in with the cool guys, and guys could always use a couple more cool ones, right? But it also speaks to all the great things you can get out of athletics as a person, which is exactly that empathy, that sort of intuition, that paying attention, that mindfulness, awareness of surroundings. Like, these are all things that are sort of underappreciated traditionally about athletic people in film, but specifically athletic men, because so often I would say that the Bender character and the Andrew character are sort of shrunk into one. And I do think it's nice that this sort of extracts like a real black, white, and gray of like masculinity and what it looks like. And I don't think I've ever really appreciated how masterfully Andrew is written until this watch of the episode as a full-blown adult who also like appreciates sports now. As someone who never appreciated sports, I really see there's an athlete in him that's so wonderfully represented.
I agree. I think Andrew would have been, he has the air of someone who could go pro, like for real, go pro, and is focused on it and fixated on that, but not so caught up in like the air of his own bullshit. Like, I just keep thinking of Revenge of the Nerds and how all the jocks were represented in that, and they were all just such like raging assholes that like we're just like going to do whatever we want, and like everybody worships us and we're just so fucking cool. And Andrew carries none of that with him. He's like a genuine person just trying to make it, and like knows what he's good at, but also like he really does take a step back to acknowledge his flaws and has to break out of the role armor he has of like, I have the status I have because I'm good at sports. I'm like actually good at something, but he knows it, and he knows that's his place, so he doesn't overshoot it. He's not like the jocks in something like Revenge of the Nerds or other 80s movies would have been portrayed as like, we have the money and the looks and the talent, so like even if we fucking lose, like we're still kings around here, and Andrew is not. And I think that was a nice flip to show a masterful writing, like you said, Molly. I like the way you described that. I think it's accurate as a real person.
Thanks.
Yeah. And such good acting by Emilio Estevez. The whole monologue when they're sitting in the circle. I keep thinking about the scene where his voice starts to break, and he's talking about Larry, the kid he assaulted. And he's like, I kept imagining him going home and talking to his dad. And the line that he says, like, the humiliation must have been unreal, is such a good line and feels like such a lived in thing to say. And for him at that age to even think all the way through that, like to truly put himself into Larry's shoes and see Larry as like a full human being and not just like a kid for him to like kick the shit out of, and then he doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, Andrew would be a dream client in that if he got into the therapy office somehow, he is so much like access to his empathy and to his emotional self, and probably would thrive in therapy to have someone that he could talk to that openly and vulnerably. And, you know, it makes this, his whole story is heartbreaking why he got into detention. Like the way he talks also like so humbly with so much humility about how he saw that kid and had kind of this like emotional break internally where all of the stuff with his dad just kind of came to a fucking head. And I think we all know that feeling where you see something of yourself that you don't like in another person and it makes you so pissed off in such an irrational, unkind way. And you can't have to almost like pull yourself back if you can from taking it out on them. And the fact that he could, in that moment, without going to therapy himself, sit there and like really articulate what his thought process was and have so much humility and such little ego about how fucked up that was, that he did that to that kid, and how that it didn't matter if the kid was quote unquote weak or not. Like that was a fucked up thing to do and he didn't deserve it. And sitting with that shame, I hope that that stays with him forever, in the sense that like he will never do something like that again. Like that hopefully was like a true learning experience for Andrew. And also hopefully if he goes on to have kids one day, changes the trajectory of how he would parent his children and the kind of pressure he would put on his kids, that he's able to access that much emotional intelligence. It's, I think, similar to what you were saying, Molly, when I watched this as a kid and a teenager, Andrew felt really one note to me. And now watching it as an adult and and through the therapist eyes, I was like, shit, this kid is like, he's it. He has such a good center. And yeah, what you're saying is like, he's like a true captain, where he's a true leader, looking out for everybody, checking in on everybody. Like he's also so astute in when Alison dumps all her shit out of her purse. And he says, either you have that shit in your purse because something bad's going on, or you wanted us to see shit in your purse and think that something's, regardless of why you did that, something's wrong. And even having that intelligence is so deep and profound. And the way that he would kind of like not go after people, but he seemed really invested in what everybody else was feeling emotionally.
His doing that wasn't to antagonize like Bender was doing. His was to try to make people feel seen, but like also not suffering bullshit. Like there's a mix of it, you know, like of no, like we're all being vulnerable here and sharing a moment here, and I'm like, we're gonna all be accountable for our shit here, and we're not gonna come in here and bullshit while everybody else is being real. Sorry.
It's funny because he seems like such a team athlete to me. And while I know wrestling is a team sport, it's not a traditionally presenting like team sport. And one of the things I was excited about when I was watching this was, is March 24th intentional? Because that is not when a major team sport is in session. So it's not football. It's not baseball. Like, is there a reason why it's written during this 1 month in which any sport he would make more sense with isn't active?
Wrestling would be this would be towards,
but it's not
state.
A group sport. Like, wouldn't he be better as like on a team? Then you would really get the payoff of like, oh, this is how a team works.
Well,
like you said, wrestling is very much a team, but it's a team individualized sport, and kind of some of the ways that baseball batting would be. Like everybody faces their opponent one-on-one, but you definitely train together as a team. You work together as a team. There's usually several people in your weight class that you all work out together and sweat together, and like physically carry each other as you run, and have to support and train and work on differences in technique and how different people are going to see things. So I think you're right in that it's a team sport, but it's not. So there's that strong sense of individualism, because ultimately only one kid per weight class gets to compete at varsity level.
And I
for a
just
tournament.
wish that there had been a sport, because we're so 95 even percent. I was going to say 95% of the way there with Andrew, because he's such a great character to rewatch. But I think that at the time, when I was rewatching this as a teenager, when it was probably made for people my age to watch, but 10 years later, I just remember thinking, I think I was missing how important it is, the team element of it. And I wondered if there was maybe something referential to a team or a teammate or something that felt more, we're brothers together, but we don't agree. If there had maybe even been a slight reference to that, I think I would have had probably a slightly better understanding of how jocks can contain multitudes.
Yeah. I will say I crawled up into IMDb's trivia right after I watched this, and I was like reading all of it aloud to Hannah. And he was actually originally supposed to be a football player, but John Hughes thought that there were too many football players in movies, so he changed him to a wrestler.
Got it.
So you are might be onto something. Fine. So we will take another break here and we'll be back to talk about Brian, the brain. All right. So Brian, the nerd, I guess. Is that what they call him?
Geek, probably.
The geek. Okay. He's actually the tallest one, which I don't know why I feel like I need to name up front. I couldn't get over the fact how tall he was.
And you know what else he is? He is our representative of Batman in this movie, because
barf.
he was the talk show host.
Oh, he was
in The Dark Knight.
For you to know, Molly, if you didn't pick up on the episode you listened to, every episode Ben has to shoehorn Batman into our discussion.
I thought
because he's in a homoerotic relationship with Batman.
Yeah.
It's more I have a relationship with trolling the shit out of you two, but yes.
He's a homoerotic relationship with trolling me and Hannah.
That's probably more accurate.
I actually get that, Ben. And like, I feel like no matter what, where you lack in practical real world talents, I might make up for you in fucking weird shit like that. So I actually completely get that. And I want to hate on it, but I respect the troll.
Brian is, he's got, I don't know if I was going to say he has the heaviest story, but that's obviously not true. I feel like every kid's story is heavy in its own way. He has arguably like the heaviest reason to be in detention, in that he was going to attempt suicide with a flare gun, which I don't even know like the efficacy of that, but
not high.
Yeah, but you do see in the beginning
bad.
Yeah, but you do see in the beginning of the movie that must have been his locker that is exploded. Like there's a locker that's burned from top to bottom, and that must have been his flare gun exploding in his locker.
I've been meaning to look up a flare gun all day because I've never seen one. Yeah, you're not killing anyone with this. I mean, well, actually, oh no, that'd be a very uncomfortable death. It actually is very, I have words for that, but this is interesting.
Would it be like taking like a highly explosive firecracker to the head?
No, probably not. They don't.
Kind of. No.
They're going to carry a chart. What he's likely to get from it is CTE.
Oh my God. The theme of the episode.
Right. From the off mic conversation. Yes. But he's
CTE comes from like a series of repeated brain so that's assuming he's going to hit himself. I mean, if he tries to repeat attempt every weekend, but why do you think he'd get CTE from just the one flare?
He might get a TBI.
He'd get concussed and get a TBI. He's more likely to suffer a TBI than he is to get anything that would penetrate his skull and cause death. I don't think the projectile moves fast enough. It's too big, it's too clunky, and it doesn't really explode. It just kind of lights on fire. So it would come out of the barrel with some significant velocity, cause impact damage and blunt force trauma, but I don't think, and probably burn, but it would likely bounce off his head before it actually like lit itself fully on fire. And I don't think it would be a successful attempt. I think what it would be a very, very embarrassing moment that would live on forever. Yes. And on that note, I was appalled that a kid that was intending to end his life and brought a weapon to do it, however ineffectual, was given detention
Well,
and not taken to a hospital?
but do you think they know why? I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't tell them why he had a gun, just that he brought a gun. I could see him because of his perfectionisty stuff like that and his like good kid rigidity, that I could see him making up some like bullshit reason of like, oh, I was borrowing it from my dad for this and da da da. And so he would still have to get a consequence because of the property damage. But I would be shocked if he admitted to anyone what his like actual intent was with the gun. I mean, granted, it is the 80s, so I wouldn't
Well, and
be
also
shocked.
they weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't put him in the hospital or even have him talk to a counselor. Like,
The other thing I was thinking with that is like back then, that would be like showing up with your wrists cut the wrong way at school, where they'd be like, you just want attention. Like, this is like a weird fake out. Spend Saturday for 8 hours with some other weird kids. This whole room, by the way, is like very much the resource room. The whole collection of this is people I grew up with. Like, we have no reason to socialize except we all have different struggles in class. But yeah, like I feel like this is just like they're like, what do we do with you? Like, go spend a Saturday here, I guess. Like,
Yeah, because we did do Heathers a few seasons ago, and that takes place around the same time. And the theme of that was suicide and how inappropriate. I mean, that was a campy movie, but also it was mirroring a real reality, which was how horribly adults were engaging with the idea of like mental health in general, but suicide specifically. And I could also see adults being so uncomfortable, especially like, because it's not like today where there's maybe like school counselors that are school psychologists that are like actually trained in this stuff. I could also see where a principal or the teacher would get so overwhelmed by the situation that they would minimize it or dismiss it as like a behavioral problem and just kind of like throw a detention at it and just like not think about it again, because they would be so stumped and like out of their expertise to know how to deal with it. The way that a lot of, I mean, you're right, like kids show up with self-harm marks and stuff, and the amount of times that parents or adults say shitty, off-color, inappropriate stuff cannot be understated. And to be real, like I've watched mental health therapists say, like mental health professionals say,
same.
Well, I mean, think about the emo era, right? Like we all made fun of that like horribly, and like kids were doing like self-harm things as like part of that, but it was like grossly misinterpreted by like the zeitgeist generally, and all of that. Like, some people that had been self-injuring for a long time, people like, oh, it's just like they're just doing it because it's a fad, and that wasn't the case. I don't think now, looking back on it as an adult, and you look back at stuff and go like, oh God, that's, these kids were like finding an outlet in a culture, but they had some serious trauma and pain and things that they were expressing, and people were still ridiculing them and like not noticing.
Yeah, outwardly mocking them like it was a fashion trend they were trying out. Like, instead of recognizing how intense you have to be feeling internally to cause that much like physical pain willingly and intentionally on yourself.
Right.
Well, it's like any identification with like a counterculture, right? Like people don't seek out counterculture because, I mean, yeah, like, you know, I was, Ben, I don't want to, make you uncomfortable, but I was an emo. I wasn't like a presenting emo, but I was an emo early on. And I will say that like anytime that like a counterculture finds you or you seek out a counterculture, there's a part of you that's like, quite literally, you're not represented in society. I don't know if that's what's going on with our boy here, but like, I think that, Hannah, I think a lot of people, I think that a lot of therapists I have, just again, self-centered, but like all of my therapists, like, no, I'm not going to like I literally wouldn't get my Adderall refilled if like they thought that what I was saying was serious. But like they kind of just like, you know what I mean? Like they're like, I see it for what it is. And I think that that's might have been what happened here. Is I don't think anyone thought that this kid was going to actually go through with killing himself. Come on.
Yeah.
Do you
And
have to call the hospital every time?
If they brought a weapon that
in his
has,
situation, yes.
his situation,
Yeah.
there's not even any equivocation. Like, would that likely resort in a inpatient stay? I doubt it. So to kind of, like, hedge the point, like that, I think he would absolutely have to get taken to a hospital for assessment, or SAST now, where someone would come out and evaluate him, and he would probably get sent. I think he'd probably be sent to partial hospital program or intensive outpatient ultimately to address the seriousness of the pressure and anxiety he's putting on himself that's causing him to feel so bad that he's perceiving perfection is the only option, and that because he failed a test, he's garbage. I think that would need treatment. I don't think that the means he presented with would be sufficiently ruled as deadly enough or serious enough that he would need to be inpatient hospitalized, and he's not presenting the way that he's in enough distress that, especially in the post-COVID world where they don't take you for hardly anything except you are actively thinking about ending your life right now, and that if you are turned loose, you might do it. But I think he would need some significant help, and for that bad feeling that is roiling inside of him and making him doubt himself to be treated. And that would need to be, like, from the mandated reporter standpoint, we'd have to respond to that.
Yeah.
Question though. Sorry, just one more
go ahead.
question about that exact thing. So like, let's say you do report him and that he does have this like experience with the mental health professionals. Is that going to be on his college application?
Permanent record?
No.
Yeah. Are they going to be like, because like, by the way, if I was the principal, that's another reason why I would go detention. I'd say if this kid's flipping out about a goddamn F on his shop project, then I'm like, I don't think he can come back from having a mental health stay on his college record. I mean, maybe this is why I told you before, but I mean this especially now, I shouldn't be a teacher, but I really would be like measuring and weighing my options and saying like, ultimately, I think it's going to fuck this kid up more if I like prevent his college or limit his college opportunities by saying this. Then maybe it's a flare gun.
Well, actually, if you don't mind me taking this, Ben, I worked at a partial hospital program in Chicago for a little over 2 years. And Brian reminds me a lot of some of the kids I would see there, because Chicago, I'm going to say, has a notorious, but I don't know if that's true really outside of Chicago. To me, around with people who work with kids and adolescents within mental health, the schools around here are notorious to us in terms of like the intensity and the pressure and the perfectionist-y stuff. We have
especially the one across the street from where you used to work.
Yes. And there are a lot of placement schools where you have to like test in and perform really well. And it's very college-esque, actually.
It's harder to get into the gifted program in Chicago than it is to get into Harvard.
Which is so ridiculous.
Insane.
And so I would work with a lot of kids like Brian, where the academic pressure would get so intense that they would have suicidal ideation, and they might not get sent to they might get assessed, but they wouldn't necessarily go to the hospital. They would come to my program, which was like a therapy school. And the amount of times I have this very distinct memory of I did family therapy, of being in family therapy and trying to make a self-care plan with this teenager and her mom, because she'd had such intense anxiety about school and just like type A burnout. And the kid said to me, I can't relax and I have homework till 11 p.m. And then the mom looked at me and goes, yeah, she does. As if like there was no wiggle room, no negotiation. And so a lot of the times the conversation I would have to sometimes have with parents, and it would be a hard conversation, is your kid can't go to college if they're dead. Your kid can't get straight A's if they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
What does their homework matter if they're fucking dead? And this was like my kind of Hail Mary thing I would say to parents.
That's
if there was
pretty severe.
that real rigidity around, because sometimes I would have that conversation you're kind of bringing up, Molly, where we would say, I think this kid needs to go to the hospital because they are presenting very unsafely. Like, we're worried that if they go home, even with their parents, that something might happen. And sometimes we'd say to parents, the only way they cannot go to the hospital is if you can watch them 24/7. And if we're having that conversation, they should be in the hospital. And the parents would sometimes say, and the kids too, well, I can't miss blank. I can't miss this test. I can't miss 2 weeks of school. And I would say, I understand this hole that you're in, which is creating this problem too. And what does it matter if you're going to fucking kill yourself? You know,
so fucking
like,
smart, Brittany, because it serves to the smaller mental problem of like, I have no choice but to do this, but also I can't get help because of this. Yes, that is such a brilliant way to put it, and such a brilliant approach, and such a useful thing, I think, really, honestly, because you sometimes hear of these scenarios getting brought up with like parents where it's like, you know, your kid's in danger if you don't like work on this. And this is just a really clear-cut example of how the calendar slices both ways, dude.
well, yeah. And
it does.
Yeah.
It really does. And especially like considering like the context of this film we're talking about, there's two things I think I wanted to like bring up with your question, Molly, because I think it's a really good one, is how it would be used now versus how it would be used and how we see it used in this film. We don't know, I think, which kid that the principal is digging in their file when Carl finds him. And we see that there's some mental health information in that. Right. I don't know if that was supposed to be for the nurse only, because the janitor was saying like, hey, in the private files, you're not supposed to be in that.
Yeah. But HIPAA wasn't a thing yet.
HIPAA was not a thing until I think 2002.
Oh, I thought it was like 96.
Jesus.
I thought Carl was going to start
2002?
blackmailing him.
He should
and
have.
like milking him for cash, dude. Because he should, yeah, 100%. He's got that $31,000 a year. I think he'd take 900 off the top for old Carl. You know what I mean? That would change his whole financial quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Sure would. I mean, even that $50 Carl asked for, I was thinking now, like, man, you're selling your integrity for $50.
Mm-hmm.
But $50 back then was, you know,
Like $200.
maybe more. But the 3 times, right? So if we're sticking at 31,000 was 96 something, like Molly did that conversion or the math there, be 150. But still, that's seeing it. I don't know what would have been allowed in private files then and in permanent records. But now HIPAA would protect that, and that information would not even go to the school beyond what the nurse might have. But I don't even know if the principal would have access to it, because it wouldn't be a physical file; it'd be a digital one.
So like in dorm, oh, sorry, Ben, in dorm placement at like so I went to Boston College just to like give an idea for size. So like people would just get matched up with fucking anyone, right? It was a big-ish school, but not so big.
Right.
But like you had to fill out your, you know, what you wanted. I never lived on campus. This is just exactly what I know. So you would fill out what you wanted, things you would allow for, things you wouldn't allow for.
Right.
Do you go in a separate listing that is maybe not necessarily marked, but is a thing that if you are a incoming freshman who has had multiple stints, like, do you have to disclose that to a college?
You don't have to tell
I don't
them
think
shit.
so.
They can't.
You don't have to tell them shit.
I don't think they can.
So if you have a kid going to college in the spring semester, you know, it's like crazy, man. College is wild.
Yeah, no, I worked with kids who are like going into college, and it is kind of at my professional discretion to encourage, but not force, but to encourage like safety planning around that if that feels important for that kid. But yeah, I've worked with plenty of kids that were in a really bad way, and they were like, I'm going off to an out-of-state college, and I would just be holding my breath that it would all be okay.
Yeah. I've had similar experiences, and I mean, even speak to some of this, having had my own mental health journey in my life, that my mom was quite concerned about that at college, even though we were many years, 5 years, I think, past any issues at this point. And um, remembering that good old Eastern Illinois University, my mom wanting me to like meet with some coordinator or ever, and I just like outright refused. But it would have been at my discretion to disclose whatever at that point, and I just like outright refused. Like, I don't need to do that. I am not in any of those places where that's relevant information for the school to know. You know, like what I went through when I was in 8th grade. Like, they do not need to know that at all, and did not tell them, and had no bearing on anything in my college career. But for kids that might have had something as traumatic as a suicide attempt in high school, I mean, it's such a potent risk question. But once they turn 18, which most college freshmen are, they are now in charge of their own medical records, regardless of who is paying the bills. And it's on them if they wish to disclose and ask for accommodations and apply for that from the school, therefore letting the school know that they've got issues that perhaps can get adjusted for. But otherwise, I don't think there's anything that a college can even remotely consider unless the student applies for aid or help.
Damn.
And one of the things I just wanted to point out, Molly, which I don't know if you know or not, so if this is something you already know, just tell me to shut up. But one of the things that we're assessing when a kid is talking about thinking that they want to kill themselves, or they want to go to sleep and never wake up, like whatever
Yeah.
they're talking about, part of what we do is we assess, are these just natural thoughts? Everybody has thoughts of death. That's totally normal and natural. The difference of when we keep talking about assessing a kid, what you're doing and what we're checking for is, do they have a plan? Do they have intent? Do they have access to the plan? So like, let's say with Brian, he says, I'm gonna shoot myself in the head with a gun. Okay. Does he have access to a gun? Yes. Does he want to do it? Yes. This kid needs to go to the hospital. So that's the difference of, versus a kid coming into my office and saying, hey, I'm having some thoughts about not wanting to be here anymore. I'm starting to get worried. And then at that point, that's when I stop the session and say, okay, I need to ask you some very specific questions about what you're talking about. Because thinking about death is normal and natural, but thinking about how you're going to end your life, what you're going to do it with, and when you're going to do it, that's somebody who's at risk.
Yeah. There's a few checks you have to
Yeah.
mark off.
It's like Clue. You know what I mean? Like the
Yes.
game Clue. Like it really is. That's very true. Because yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I would know how to answer those questions, honestly, if I was a child. But like, you know what I mean? Like I would be like, well, I don't, so that's very interesting. This is all a lot to consider. And I think no matter what, whenever I digest this, I hope someone in the meantime listening gets to enjoy it, like understand the lesson. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Well, yeah. And I think a lot of times with a kid that's younger too, you have to kind of have this conversation with their parents as well, in terms of like, do they have access to anything? Could they have access to anything? Like medications, weapons, stuff like that. Because kids are allowed to say like, oh, I wish I was fucking dead, in my office. And
For
I'm not
real.
going to be like, let's, call the paddy wagon and get you sent out. Like,
Yeah,
it's,
exactly.
you have to have all those things hit, because people also hang out with suicidal thoughts passively, sometimes for long periods of time. And they can actually feel scared about that themselves. Like it can feel almost like an intrusive thought, but they don't want to die necessarily, and they aren't planning to die, and they aren't working on it. And so it is this spectrum of things that I wish more people knew, because I think they would be more honest in therapy if they had the safety of knowing that it wouldn't get them like shipped off or
Flexible
hospitalized.
language. Yeah. I mean, I have to establish a pretty like comfortable tone with any doctor I see. I don't know if you guys experience that as what like do you find that there's certain patients that need to establish a baseline with you, which like, I'm unprofessional, I'm gonna swear, I'm gonna say like insane shit, but it's not normal. Do you have
Yeah.
do you get that preface a lot?
Yeah,
Yeah.
frequently.
Yeah.
Like, make space for it. Be like, it's okay. I'm gonna like if somebody I felt like I just was gonna like fucking murder my brother, and we don't take that seriously if it's not like
Right.
you get to know the person. If they're like, no, I'm gonna fucking kill my brother with a fucking knife. I'm gonna stick it in his fucking jugular and watch him bleed.
Right.
Like then you go like, so you have a knife?
Yeah, then you're gonna take it up. But yeah, no, like
No, I love it.
I think we all probably take pretty well, we have personalities, right? Like pretty like casual approaches with our clients where they can be goofy and make jokes and, and I talk about TikTok sometimes with clients and like, when you work with kids and teenagers, you also have to be at their level. You can't be talking like an uber professional, disconnected robot person.
Cool. I mean, Brian's not cool anyway. I don't even know how he like got through this conversation, to be honest. And I imagine he probably did admit it. I agree that there's no reason why he would say this, but I just think he would admit it.
I think within his character, he couldn't not because he couldn't probably bear with telling the lie, even though he probably doesn't want to. And I mean, he may not have. He's smart enough to know not to, but I don't know. I think to your point, Molly, I don't know that within what's appropriate for the character himself, that he wouldn't have been able to not tell on himself.
He has a craftiness to that, right?
Which makes his mom's attitude towards him like also a billion times worse. If the reason why he's in quote unquote trouble is because he wanted to hurt himself, and then she's like haranguing him, which is his real mom, actually. His real mom and his real sister play his mom and sister in the car, and just haranguing him before he gets in the door, like really bums me out for him too, because what message is that sent to Brian? Like, even when I am doing the most desperate thing you can do as like a cry of help for my parents, they're still more focused on how the teeny ways that I fuck up. Because I think that's also what's so hard with a kid that is such like a perfectionist-y kid like him, is there's no wiggle room. He's doing so well and yet he feels like he can't make a single mistake. It's so awful when a person of any age is in a dynamic where they get no credit for the 99% that they do things well, and their parents only focus on the one mistake or accident or fuck up, and that creates its own rigidity, right? Where kids will either give up, which he does kind of do. I mean, that's what attempting suicide is in some ways, and be like, it doesn't matter anyway. Or they like have that really perfectionistic attitude for the rest of their lives, very type A. Sometimes they can be very high functioning, but internally very miserable. And it really bums me out, Brian, because what's interesting about him too is that even though he is the nerd in this scenario, he is still like takes a lot of chances. He's kind of mouthy. Like, he isn't a meek dork. Like that, he's like, even though he is intimidated by the other kids, he's still like really trying to like get in with them.
And he tries to break up the fight. Yeah,
like he isn't a stereotypical bunched up quiet nerd.
I think Brian has potential with the tech landscape where it is to get in at Apple very early,
right?
By the time he graduates, and then like kind of just really maybe build within, do like coding, build out a bunch of stuff, but eventually become like a micro face of the company. Someone who can go and do sales meetings, presentations without bringing out Tim Apple. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Steve Jobs, I guess, at the time.
And his mom will still find something to hate about him.
And add the pressure to him that like if he makes one mistake, it's not only like going to derail him temporarily, but it's going to catastrophically cause him to be unable to meet any of his goals and dreams that have been pre-programmed in him.
Okay, but what if Brian, and we don't know this because I haven't looked it up, so there's no proof otherwise. What if Brian invented the Apple? What if he invented the iPod? And what if the whole reason why we have podcasts is because Brian, and like in the movie, grew up to invent podcasts via inventing the iPod. And that's why we're all here today.
I mean, all hail Brian then, I guess.
Don't you
But
think? I think he could do it.
I mean, I think he could be exactly that guy wearing a turtleneck and round glasses that would have been beat up in 80s high school that went on to invent the thing that made all of everything else for everyone possible and be the reason why what's his name? Bill Gates said, "Be nice to nerds. You'll probably work for one."
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hopefully he's I was going to say, hopefully he doesn't become an Elon Musk, but he doesn't have the qualities in the background that creates an Elon Musk. But anywho, before we get on that train, let's take another break here and we'll be back to talk about Alison. All right. So Alison, actually, some of the stuff we were talking about with Brian, I feel like apply to Alison. She is the one that's doing weird, absurd, attention seeking, emo-esque behavior and is being kind of written off as like the weirdo who must be doing stuff for attention. She is very quiet, which is also a way to get attention, to be quiet and silent and unresponsive. And she's also doing a lot of attention, like as the movie progresses and she's trying to become part of the group, you can see that the way that she is trying to ingratiate herself is with all of these like odd attention seeking behaviors. Like the way that she gets into the Brian Andrew conversation is admitting that she stole his wallet. And then the way she tries to bond with them is dumping out her entire purse with her tampons and everything and then running away. That she's someone who does a lot of that like push pull attention seeking behavior that can be very much written off as like someone who's trying to establish a quirky personality.
I agree. I think she is like using the little attention seeking moments to fill in that need for her that she later reveals to us isn't getting met, that her parents ignore her. But I think we get one clue and only one, because I think she remains kind of a mystery. She never tells us the truth of why she's there.
She's there because she had nothing better to do.
That can't possibly be true.
I know that's not true.
Right? Like there's no way.
Absolutely.
But there was one little moment that I caught this time watching it that I don't know if I ever caught before, but it kind of gave me a clue into her home life. Two things. One, her getting out of the backseat of the car, despite being probably a senior, means her parents are probably like overprotective of her. And two, that she had the wherewithal enough to slip in and grab that knife the second Bender put it down. She just kind of leaned over and went boop, picked that up. And to me, that seems like her parents are probably ignoring her because they're fighting with each other. And she is used to keeping a hyper awareness of where the dangerous things are that can elevate a situation, possibly get thrown or used, and like just kind of, we're just going to go ahead and pick that up. Like it could be a credit card bill or a check, or could be somebody's booze or cigarettes or something that if that's causing a fight, she has the wherewithal to just go like, and we're just going to pick that up. And no one will notice what she's doing because they're so enthralled in their own shit. And that was a read I got. It's why I've seen this movie many times. Like catching that kind of piqued my interest a little bit.
Well, like low key, is it too early to say? When I was watching this, I was thinking she's a klepto dog.
Maybe
That's like it was more. We have to You're gonna diagnose them.
No. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna. No, you're right. I just was gonna say that's like literally. I was thinking was she's so her behavior. So I want to know more about that. What happened to Winona Ryder?
Oh, that is interesting. I feel like if she is being ignored at home, she may be very resourceful and maybe like taking the wallet and taking the knife and stuff like that. It could be her trying to be resourceful, or just like she has to take care of herself so she gets where she can. Or I think a lot of it just comes back to attention seeking. And I think what I want to differentiate when I say attention seeking isn't in this kind of like shitty judgmental way that we talk about in mainstream culture, where it's this very like dismissive thing that it's not really a big deal. You're just like obnoxious and immature. We all need attention. especially from our parents, especially as we are growing up. Like, attention isn't a bad thing. Needing attention, seeking attention is a normal part of being a human being. And when you don't get it where you need it, which is from your parents, you will attempt to get it in other ways. And her doing all this bizarro, off-putting shit like the lying, the making outrageous claims. I got very nervous when she started talking about her shrink, and I was worried that that was going to be the truth when she was talking about that stuff, because that would be very 80s
Because
movie.
you didn't get to see that on TNT, right?
Probably not.
No, definitely not.
Which
Not
is
that
so
one.
crazy that that's how you guys like.
I didn't
came
know they
into-
smoked weed in this movie.
I didn't know they smoked weed.
Them being
Dude.
stoned makes everything make so much more sense in
So
terms of
much
the
more
turn the
sense.
movie takes, with them being more vulnerable and goofy and interactive with each other. Of course, because they're stoned. And when
I
you're
literally,
stoned,
I
yeah.
cannot believe that because I think that when I would watch it, if it was, because it was always on, if it
Yes.
was passively on,
Right.
I would always think like, oh, well, like I know I never thought about the fact that there's some people who didn't know what was going on with them.
Yeah, I just thought that they maybe got cabin fever and were acting goofy, montage style. You know how those movies like a montage where everyone starts being
Yeah,
silly,
I thought it was
goofy.
just like a weird flex in the movie that just didn't really make any sense.
So
Yeah.
did you think like they, wait,
I had no anything because they wouldn't have shown any of that. So I
Mhm.
had no idea that that's what they did. And again, it puts so much more context into the film.
but did you feel like now seeing it today, you felt like it was kind of insane? Did you feel a little insane watching it?
In what way?
In the
Yeah.
way that like I can't like, oh, this movie makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
now.
We were yelling at the TV.
Hannah and I watched it together on Monday, and we were screaming because we were like, oh, of course. Because I think on TV, it was like they got the weed out of Bender's locker. He has the confrontation with the principal where he is playing basketball or pretending to play basketball. And then I feel like it hard cuts to the scene where, what's his nuts? Andrew is like dancing
Yes.
and they're like chit-chatting, but there's no smoke or smoking, and so it just was like they've finally like reached the edge where they were like, fine, we'll just hang out because we're so fucking bored. Going back to Alison, though, I think what I want people to take from this is what we were saying before, is that when a kid like you, I think we were all kind of saying this in some way, but when a kid is acting like that, or when a person's acting like that, people who are mentally well and stable don't do stuff like that. They don't steal shit and say bonker stuff and act out and are off-putting like that. When someone's doing all that stuff, something is going on. And even if they are lying about sleeping with their therapist or about wanting to die or something, people who are having a fine time in life aren't saying stuff like that. And so that alone, like if there's smoke, there's fire. Like that alone is something to take seriously. And she is someone to take seriously, even if everything she's saying on face value is bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely. And the stealing, what though the question I ask about kind of like, was that because she's used to doing that, is only one possible question. Like the other thing is like, is she stealing to force interactions? Because if she steals somebody's shit and then has the opportunity to get an interaction out of them by like producing it, like she did with the wallet.
Yeah, it's like social skills for her.
Exactly. Like it's a forced interaction she created because now that person has to talk to her and pay attention to her and interpret her in order to get their shit back.
Mm-hmm.
And that could have been it too. I mean, for the wallet, that was certainly it. I don't know about the knife, but the idea that people don't randomly make snow out of their dandruff.
Ugh, I can't even watch that
That's
part.
brutal.
And then like laugh and smile about like obviously drawing attention to the fact that he's being really showy about it, of like, look what I can do. Yeah, they
Like
don't
everything
do that
she's doing is very big and performative. Like when she makes
Right.
the sandwich,
Yeah.
she wants people to notice how weird she's being.
She does. Absolutely. And someone who's getting ignored and isn't getting their need met will resort to a higher intensity, higher risk behavior to get that need met. C, cheating in relationships. C, stealing when out of food and hungry and broke. C, begging on the street corner when you don't have any money. Like,
I love this. Get more of that. Like, explain this more.
basically, the more risks the more you have to try harder to get your basic needs met, like food, shelter, clothing, affection, love, the more risks you are willing to take to get them met.
So, like, it is crazy how it could literally start with Captain Crunch and Pixie Sticks.
Right.
And a disruptive lunchroom meal. I mean, she just is almost too beautiful for this behavior, I have to say.
Well,
I never buy her costume.
What's unfortunate for her, for this reason you're bringing up, is that she is ripe to be groomed and taken advantage of. Like the first attractive guy, God bless it, it's Andrew, if that ends up going somewhere, but I don't know if that would go anywhere. But she's the kind of girl that I worked with who some 25-year-old fucking creep who is not doing anything with their life would find her and love bomb her. Yep. And she would do anything they wanted. And she would put up with a lot of bullshit and maybe even abuse and stuff because she's finally getting that need met. Mm-hmm. And I think people who have never really known what that's like can struggle to understand. It's a very like, why wouldn't they leave? Like, why would they date someone like that? Why would they do crazy stuff like that? Like people who ask those questions, I assume they just don't know what it's like to be in such like a desperate, scarce place with a basic human need. And that's where I would feel very nervous for Alison because she is also conventionally attractive when she is made over, even though I think she's cute no matter what. But yeah, she's attractive enough.
Also, it's just honestly, can we get a diagnosis for guys like not being able to see? Like, yeah, babe, she has beautiful cheekbones. She just has like also a great shaggy do. Like, what do you want me to say?
I mean, we could get into a whole full conversation about the male gaze.
Please. Okay.
We're already burning time.
Should we just do She's All That next time? I mean,
my God. Yes. Talk about an athlete who's like, I'm bigger. Hacky sack, I'm bigger than my athletics dad.
Right. Ugh, which fun fact, I thought that's the movie we were doing when we did the one Drew Barrymore that you were talking about. The name just left my brain, but I thought that's what I watched that movie for like 10 minutes. Is like texting Hannah and Brittany like, why the fuck are we doing? I hate all of this. And they're like, what fucking movie are you watching with Freddie Prinze right now? Like, we're not doing that. Like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, that's the wrong transformation. That's the wrong transformation.
No, I know. That's why I relate. One of the many reasons I relate to you, because that anecdote stayed in the podcast. And I have done that for my Lifetime podcast before, where I've gotten like 50 minutes into a Meredith Baxter Burney movie. I felt for you. I do think that you're a podcasting secret sibling of mine that I didn't know about. I feel that way about all of you, though. Let's do this all the time.
Does anyone have anything else they want to say specifically about Alison? She's such an interesting character to me.
I think the only thing I want to say about her, other than I think all these insights are brilliant, is that I wish we had gotten whatever I assume got left on the cutting room floor of her character that got lost.
Yeah, and also like the sharp turn of like her kissing Andrew at the end. Yeah. That felt very sudden.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that lends to your point though, that you astutely mentioned. That's true.
She's going to imprint on him like a baby duck.
There you go. Exactly that. Like he noticed her, and then like he noticed her hard, and like when she walked out with her made up, he was like, oh God. Hello.
Now I'm envisioning an awful scenario. This is an awful scenario where you have the white knight savior, super empathetic, emotionally intelligent person, Hannah's nodding, and then the person who is a wreck. And that is a terrible combination that happens all the time, where he's going to try to save her, and she's going to energy vampire.
No, I think they're going to be in a really good relationship.
I'm looking forward to the fanfic you write.
I know. I'm just saying that if anyone out there is feeling helpless at the end of this, I just want to say that I do think that they probably date until freshman year, and then she maybe moves abroad, and then but they're still best friends, you know?
I would hope so.
I
mean, I
appreciate
think
your
he would.
headcanon.
I think he would treat her well, but I don't know if it would be healthy long term. I mean, if
Maybe it would
anyone's
set
gonna
a
clock on
healthy
her, it's Andrew.
foundation for her versus her abandonment. Maybe Andrew will be a nice foundation for her coming from such a place of loneliness, I feel.
Well, she's someone where what can be helpful about therapy is constructing a good goodbye. So when I've worked with kids who've had to like leave our program and they have their own abandonment rejection stuff, or they have to terminate with me for some reason, it gives you an opportunity to have a good goodbye that's not grounded in feeling like abandoned or rejected. And that can be why it's any therapist listening, it's very good to have like a solid termination plan. You just can't end a relationship with a client the way that you would with like a general practitioner or something. Like you have to be thoughtful about how you wrap things up, especially with a case like her, where you'd want it to be very slow and steady and make sure that she doesn't take it personal as much as possible.
Right, because the ground for this is ripe with Andrew is, let's assume, going to get a scholarship, and maybe he's going to go to Nebraska or Iowa or Minnesota, somewhere far away for college, and we don't even know what the age gap is between them. Maybe he leaves a year before her. And
that's a good point. We're assuming they're all in the same grade.
And maybe they are, maybe they aren't, and I think they would have a really hard time with the breakup. If Andrew is going to go away to college, he might struggle to like not go, or he has to go. And then if she's imprinted on him and, is getting her needs met and wants to stay, she is a substantial risk to turn up and demonstrate some really desperate behaviors. And not that she necessarily would, but people that carry that profile certainly can end up in that space.
Well, yeah, and part of what I was thinking about, Alison, is that even if going along with the premise of her and Andrew are together, even if Andrew is kind and sweet and supportive and stable, that's not what her experience has been like.
Nope.
So it will be really hard for her to just accept that, like that's true and that she can believe it and that he's going to stay around. But with therapy, she'll be able to talk about the relationship dynamic, and she'll be able to bring up, like, why am I feeling like I'm just mad at him sometimes, or I feel like I don't want to talk to him sometimes, and he's just so nice, and like, I don't know what to do. Like, because of the way that she has seen relationships go, and because of the way that she has been treated, it's going to be hard for her to lean into Andrew and lean into the kindness and the niceness, to trust him. That's going to be really hard for her. So I don't know. Like, I think
she'd probably test the shit out of him.
Agreed.
Yeah. And then it would spin him the fuck out.
And that would be the only way that she would feel like she can trust him, is by putting him through these tests that help her know that he really isn't going to leave.
Which
you're so smart. Like, that's so true.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So we'll take another break here and we'll be right back. So this episode's been kind of a long one, which is fine. But with treatment, we've talked about a lot of treatments here and there with these characters. Is there anything, I'm going to kind of chop this up a little bit. Is there anything more we want to say about any specific character in terms of treatment?
I think the only thing I want to point out, and I don't have to, talk about it for 10 minutes or anything, but is that I think with Claire, I think that she would have to do family therapy. I think family therapy is one of the ways that she can find her own role in the family and find a way for her to be out of the trap of her parents' marriage. So I think that she would need family therapy. That's the only thing that I was going to talk about in treatment, really. And I don't think we really talked about treatment with Claire.
That's a good point. Yeah. I think the only thing else I would add with Bender, I've worked with a lot of kids that are Bender coded that come from family environments where the families aren't workable, and that situation's not really going to change because they're treatment resistant, all yada, yada. And I think with him, kind of what you guys were referencing, I think maybe it was you, Molly, referencing early about being good at shop. is I think what would be really important for him is to find something that he feels proud of and confident in. And it makes me think of when I worked at one of my first PHPs, which was more with kids like Bender. One of the therapists, which was so sweet, she had her husband come in who was a graphic designer, like an artist professionally. And he did like weekly free tutoring with this one kid who was really, really creatively talented and got no home support to try to build up his confidence in that and to work him into something real and tangible that he can feel proud of, that he can touch, that he can, show, that he can feel. And then I think with him to make it something that he can create independence. Because with a kid like Bender, I'm with kids like that, I'm trying to get them out of their house as soon as they can. So it becomes less about making your home life work and more about getting the fuck out of there as soon as you can and building your own support system and your own resources and your own way to live. And with some kids, that is college. Like if you can get when I work with foster kids, because they would sometimes get financial aid and stuff because of their situation, I'd be like, let's get out of here and into college, or like, let's get into a trade or a skill. Because like I said, that also builds up confidence that he desperately needs confidence. All that swagger is fake stuff. He needs to feel like he's good at something to keep him going in life and to keep him from recreating this cycle with his own family if he has one day. So that's all I wanted to say about Bender.
And I love that. I think it's really important. I think sometimes the hardest thing in therapy is helping people work against those ingrained instincts, like to get parent approval and realize that your only chance of success is going somewhere else. Mm-hmm. You have to leave. You cannot be successful here. Like, John, you will never win. You can never win. You can never be good enough for your dad because he is miserable.
He doesn't want to be pleased with you.
He doesn't want to be pleased with anything, and it's impossible. And it's not about you. You gotta let go. I think that would be the most powerful thing. With the characters I look at, like I'm looking at the kids and thinking about who I'd want to treat. And honestly, the person I think needs the most therapy help is the principal.
You always pick the most rando person, which
really
I like.
You really
it always
do.
surprises
Go ahead.
me.
Please go on.
Pop off, King.
I think the person we see who gets the least development, the least work, the least growth is the principal, and he's the one who's in the position to cause the most harm. And if he continues to stay in this miserable place where he's resenting other people's ability to actualize and still have that chance in front of them, he's likely to try to use the bull with horns approach and assert his middle-age, midlife crisis bullshit onto other teenage boys who might still be having some kind of fire left in them to fight against the world and break the molds they need to grow into whoever they're going to be. Most of the people that make it in this world don't do it by following a conventional path. They do it by having the courage enough to just say, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And if teachers crush that out of kids without guiding them properly of like, okay, it's okay to have your own ideas, to do things your own way, but not to, you can't crush it out of them like the only way you'll be successful is my way and that you'll have to submit to authority. Like, you need to have a little bit of healthy, neutrality, be a little neutral good. Like, I will do good, but I'm not necessarily going to follow the rules you put in front, because who says your rules are just? Like that little bit of question that I think we see Fox News telling our grandparents to resent in kids when they question things like critical race theory, for example, that people love to be like, well, that's a buzzword. We shouldn't be teaching people that shit. Like, oh, hold on. All of us were taught a version of like whitewashed ass history that didn't acknowledge the facts that some horrible shit was done by our country. Like, that's messed up. And maybe we should teach the whole truth, that this teacher is totally that person that's watching Fox News in their 80s and 90s now going like, yeah, that's right. These damn kids, everybody running this country and they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And maybe if somebody could have helped him along and been like, hey, why don't you tell me what's going on here with you? What didn't happen for you? What's making you so angry and so resentful? What do we need to rediscover in you, like these kids got to do when, okay, they got high to do it. But watching like Andrew do cartwheels and like sing and like jam out and like loosen up.
I love it.
Can you imagine what the principal would be like if somebody helped him rediscover the ability to play? And if, like he could teach kids from that standpoint of like, okay, hey, like, look, there's rules in life. Like you got to pay your bills. You got to
get
do
him
the thing.
into an improv for anxiety class.
I mean, maybe, but not, not come at it from this standpoint of hatefully crushing everybody into the same soul crushing reality he has. I think I'd want to work with him on that like there are lots of routes to success in this world. And most of them come from having the freedom to be authentically yourself and do the things that make you, you, while also having a strategic mind to apply them in a way that is equitable. And I would love to see him in therapy kind of re-examine what's keeping him stuck so that he doesn't project that onto other people's realities and cause so much harm.
All right, Molly, is there
I'm
anything more
listening.
that you want to add to this as a writer or as a mental health participant? If you want to think about it like
Well,
that.
I think
We're all
Claire's
mental health
dad
participants.
needs to go to therapy.
Oh, I'm sure all of their
He's-
parents need to go to therapy.
No, but like I feel he's at the precipice of what could be a very dark psychological future for him with the exploitation of women. I feel like, this could go to like Up the Times, like him going to Chicago for a business dinner, and then he's hiring like, a lady of the night to like sit with him and he's going to tell her stories or whatever. I feel like where this could go from there is he either goes to therapy or it's going to get to a very dark place, like possibly even some form of what would legally be considered trafficking now. Like I think if he went to therapy, he could have like, I think that it would be effective on someone like him quick if it was at the right moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not letting him become a Richard Gere.
No, I mean, he's not going to be a good guy. I just mean like slightly less like, like maybe if he had like some coping mechanisms into how to communicate with his wife. It's not that I want to blame him. I just really do think he's the problem.
I definitely think he needs to figure out like what he thinks his dynamic with Claire is and get that the fuck figured out.
Yeah.
Because that's dark to me. All right. Well, we'll take our final break here and be back with final thoughts. So we were thinking with final thoughts that it could be fun if we each self-identified as one of the Breakfast Club. I can be vulnerable and go first. I hate to admit this, but I would be a Brian. And this is why. When I was in 7th grade, I got a lunch detention. And I cried so hard in class in front of my peers about getting in trouble for lunch detention that my teacher ripped it up and said, "You've been punished enough." And I did not have to go through with the lunch detention because he felt such pity for me because of the insane reaction I had because of the pressure I felt like I could not get in trouble. And that's still something I'm working on as an adult, of this idea that like I can't get in trouble. And so unfortunately, I am a Brian in that if I got an F in shop, I don't know if it would get to the dark level it got with him, but I would probably have some sort of like mental breakdown that would be very intense. So unfortunately, I am a Brian. And anyway, with how I feel about this movie, though, I really like this movie. I like it more now that I understand the full context of it. And I think it's a movie that I would definitely rewatch. I think some of the stuff is obviously problematic. I mean, the way that Bender treats Claire the whole movie would not fly in today's society. He's basically like sexually harassing her.
Yeah.
And put his head up her skirt. Like he does really disgusting stuff that it sucks that the message in the movie is that he gets her in the end.
Right.
Like you treat a girl like this and you talk about her body and her virginity and all that stuff. And then she likes you. That very like, if he's mean to you, he likes you. So I don't love all that part. And I think actually Molly Ringwald wrote a Me Too, like when Me Too was happening, she kind of wrote an essay about rewatching Breakfast Club with her 10-year-old daughter and how problematic that dynamic was and how it wouldn't fly today. So other than that, and the use of like gay slurs and stuff, I think this movie actually is kind of timeless in how it discusses teenagers. It's like I can see where this movie might have like blown kids' minds when they saw it in terms of like feeling really seen. It's such a, for how like limited demographically it is, it's still such a rich um demonstration of like the teenage psyche and treats teenagers seriously and their feelings seriously, which I always appreciate. So that's my final thoughts. Hannah, do you want to go next?
Okay. Yeah, it's a tricky question for me. Because my home life was more like Bender's and but my presentation at school was like Claire.
Yeah.
But I was also really like a people pleaser is really what it was, and just like masking all the crazy shit that I was experiencing at home. So I don't know. So I kind of feel like it makes sense to say Claire in some ways, and it also makes sense that I didn't present the way that Bender presents. I presented the way that Claire presents.
Mm.
Yeah, I think, barring the things that Brittany already brought up about the film, I think it's a good film. I think it does something with teenagers that helps show the depth of their feeling that I still don't think that adults take seriously.
Mm-hmm.
That's really unfortunate. And I think that's one of the things that it does really well. And I'm probably going to watch it again after us just talking about it and thinking about all the things we've been talking about. I'll probably watch it again to just kind of like see what it feels like after talking about all these different aspects of the film. So I'll definitely watch it again.
All right. Molly, do you mind going next?
I would say, at my core, I am a Brian. I would say that my anxieties were less so anchored to academics. I just knew that wasn't my strong suit, but I was very much like living in self-torture mode, or like maybe like contained torture mode. Very like religious, like very like Irish Catholic, not like crazy, but just like it all felt very oppressive, and I was very much a rule follower and like couldn't even get away with anything. But then I would say like a 1/4 shell Alison, maybe a little bit, maybe even like a little bit of a third, because I wasn't like a liar, but I was a creative kid. Like I was just someone who was always like kind of like telling stories. It's never like lying or fabricating anything. I just was always, I yapped. And so I really enjoyed that when she was kind of like really finally having her moments, that she just dialed in on some of the most weird ass shit she could. And she really took her moment for the moments that she had. She was great. Loved it.
All right. So you're like a Brian Moon, Allison Rising?
Probably.
Okay. And then any final thoughts about the movie from like a writing standpoint or just enjoying the movie standpoint?
No, I just think it's such a cool, clean, crisp movie. It really is. It's like if you have ever wanted to like write a script, I would say that this is like the most approachable movie to watch, and I think a very findable script. And I would really recommend watching this movie with a script, because there's something also very satisfying about like just as a viewer, like as an adult viewer watching this movie, there's something so satisfying about the way these characters play out and the way that there's subtle nuances and seeing how much performance affects things. It's really a great movie, and I would say a good intro for beginners, people who want to start to learn how to write movies, even if you feel like you've seen The Breakfast Club a million times. Like just watch it and read the script, and that'll make you think.
Oh, very cool. All right, Ben.
So I am probably to no one's best surprise, Andrew would be the character
Knew
most
it.
like me. Yeah,
Knew it.
that probably shouldn't surprise anybody.
Definitely not.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I was never a team captain of anything, but definitely was an athletic kid. And like I am now, I'm a jack of all trades type. I can pretty much do a lot of things to a acceptable level, generally above replacement. But unlike Andrew, though, like I was never going to be a state wrestler. Like I was never that athletically gifted. I had enough athletic skill to make the team, to play, to do things, but I'm not getting a scholarship anywhere for that. My talent was probably more in performance than I ever gave myself space to acknowledge because of well, not my dad's type. My dad is more of a Brian. He's a professor that went to Stanford. I mean, my dad's a definite Brian. And my mom kind of too. So my family life might have been a little more like his without the intense pressure. I was kind of like the rare gem. Nobody else in my family is an athlete like I am, which has its own issues, right? But I think I identified more with his story. Like there were points in time in my life where I like had like just absurd bullying behavior either done to me or did it. And I definitely carried some deep shame and regret about some of those choices that I made. And like looking back and recognizing I would never do that to anybody now. But then like those spontaneous moments of like trying to grapple with what masculinity even is or how to find my place or how to stand out and not be a target. I think and realizing like, oh, well, I guess I have to assert dominance to have any because that's what's been done to me and how fucked up that is. I think and how much that masterclass in writing really gave so much depth to that character where I think much like Andrew, like I am so much more like now the things that I've done since high school and since active sports playing, I did a sketch comedy troupe where I did become the vice president of that. And I've been in bands for 12 years or 15 years and I've played with touring acts. Like I've risen to some levels and done some things that, you know, nobody would have thought a starting offensive and defensive lineman on the football team was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like I probably should have been with the theater kids, but and eventually did choose band kind of over football. Like I kind of gave up what would have led to a path to starting on varsity to like not do the weight training class and like do weight training on my own, but play in the band because music meant it so much to me that I wanted to do that. And I think I see that in Andrew that he would have wanted to like look at him when he's performing and jamming out and stuff like
He's having fun.
He's having fun. And that seemed like more authentically him the first time he actually like let himself loose and not been like uptight and rule following and like playing a role and leaning into it and standing up to a bigger kid that's probably could have kicked the shit out of him if he wanted to.
Will you watch this movie again, Ben?
I will watch this movie till eternity because it's timeless. And I watched it in college in my adolescent psych class. And I love what the professor did with us of watching this and kind of exploring exactly what you said, the depth of teenage emotions, especially when we weren't so far removed from it as we are now that, hey, remember how thoroughly and completely you felt things and how also, like Molly said, confined to an like unrealistic standard it was.
Mm-hmm.
I think this movie covered so many things in such a I love what you said, clean and crisp, Molly, from the script writing standpoint. It is so clean. It nails its points and it can be watched over and over again, maybe without the, slurs, but beyond that, it's excellent.
I say keep them in. I don't represent, none of the groups represent me, but I just want to say if you're just looking to have a little bit of vintage color, I think a stray F slur written on a locker, I feel like the LGBTQIA plus community can agree that that's an important representation for the time. You know what I mean? You were bullied.
If we forget history, we repeat it, Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't think we should erase it just like that. If we were to, it needs to come with that caveat of like, this was absolutely what would have been said and casually then, but not okay now. Let's not restart it.
Well, on that note, we want to thank you again, Molly, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out to what I think might be the longest episode we've ever recorded.
Quite possible.
So I appreciate your patience.
I feel like that's crazy because I feel like the one I listened to the other day was like 2.5 hours long, but this was like a fucking blast. I can't thank you enough for having me. Really, honestly, such a pleasure and the most fun. I really valued everyone's opinions. Like, I'm a big fan of your show now. Like, I'm very honored to be a part of it. And I welcome you on my shows anytime, and I will come back anytime. If someone flakes, I'll be there.
Well, we'd love to have you. This was a blast. We really appreciate you, and it's an honor to have you.
So I'm going to shout you out one more time. So if you enjoyed listening to Molly, you can check her out at Mother May I Sleep With podcast, which is Lifetime movie podcast I listen to. And that one is a chunk of time. That one I probably listened to over like 2 days. Because I think, Molly, you can admit it's like 3 or 4 hours long.
Well, that's the show that no, this is the show that people have been mad if I didn't do. So I've been doing this show for a very long time. It was supposed to only be a 15 episode series of Lifetime original movies that I was going to use as like a thing for my resume. And then it turned out being like, wound up being this thing where people didn't want me to stop. And I stopped allowing stops. So one thing I found out along the way, unfortunately, is that when I try to scale the episodes back, people are like, I can't clean out my entire garage to this episode
piddly
today.
episode.
What's with this 90-minute shit? I have a whole garage to clean out. And so that's the
Right.
relationship I think I have with my listeners, which is the Lifetime relationship, where it's the network of doing your other house chores while it's on TV. Like it's I enjoy that
passive entertainment.
Yeah.
And then I also want to shout out one more time your Trend Lightly podcast. I really appreciate it, and that it keeps me in the loop with things like Vanderpump Rules and stuff that I don't watch or participate in, but I get to be in the know because, as Hannah knows, I like to know what's going on, even if I don't have like explicit interest in the thing that's trending. So I appreciate that nugget you give me every week to stay in.
Thank you, babe.
Yeah, of course. I feel like there was something even in today's episode where I was like, I'm glad she's talking about this because I didn't know what people were talking about on TikTok, but I can't remember exactly
The
what the
Citibank
topic was.
glitch.
Yes, the Chase. That's exactly what it is. The Chase Bank glitch.
Yeah, the
and I
glitch.
was like, people are talking about this. I don't know what. And then as soon as you start talking about it, I think I went, yes, to myself in my kitchen. Because I was like, now I know what's going to go on. But anywho, I have to do our little rigmarole. So if you would like to find us anywhere, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook at Popcorn Psychology. You can find us on Threads now at Popcorn Psychology because we're no longer on Twitter or X or whatever. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. And if you would like to support us, we would always appreciate that, as we are a DIY podcast. So you can support us via Patreon, or you can buy merch at TeePublic. And as always, please leave us a rating and review. It's the cheapest way to support us and also the most effective way for new listeners to find us. And we really appreciate that. So everybody, stay cool and stay out of trouble. Papa, stop recording.